Europe, spring of 1945. In cities crushed under 6 years of fire and ruin, church bells rang to announce the end of war. But for hundreds of young women in faded gray-green uniforms of the Wehrmacht auxiliaries, this was not a day of liberation. It was a day of departure. They were marched toward wooden boxcars that smelled of smoke and old iron, carrying suitcases that held the last pieces of their former lives. The war had ended, yet their journey was just beginning, not toward home, but toward captivity. For years they had been told that Americans were predators, that sailing west meant hunger, humiliation, and the slow erosion of dignity. On the ship crossing the Atlantic, many clung to these warnings the way a drowning person clings to debris. They braced for cruelty. They braced for darkness. But when the coastline of the United States appeared through the morning haze, when buildings rose untouched by bombs, standing in clean sunlight, when American soldiers approached, not with whips or rifles raised, but with cups of water held out through the bars, silence fell over the women. The faces they saw were calm, steady, almost indifferent, so far from the monsters they had imagined. Their fear did not disappear. It shifted into something harder to understand. They had survived the Reich. Now they were about to confront a different kind of battlefield, one where the enemy was not violence, but a world that challenged everything they believed. And behind the fences of the American POW camps, the shock waiting for them would come from something painful. The final months of 1945 moved across Germany like the slow settling of ash after a firestorm. Cities once alive with noise and ambition now lay in fractured silence. Entire streets had vanished, replaced by craters and broken stone. Roofless houses stood like open mouths frozen in a final scream. Smoke clung to the air long after the fires had died. Inside the shattered landscape, thousands of women in gray-green auxiliary uniforms drifted among the ruins, unsure where to stand or whom to follow. Their world had collapsed with such speed that many still carried the posture of soldiers, even though the Reich they served no longer existed. Anna, a young secretary from Munich, stood at the remains of a rail yard with dozens of others. Her boots were splitting at the seams. Her uniform smelled of dust and old sweat. Her hands shook slightly each time distant gunfire cracked across the horizon. Reminders that fragments of war still burned through the country. The women gathered around her were typists, nurses, radio operators, clerks, pieces of the war machine that had eaten their youth. They were not warriors, but they had worn uniforms and obeyed orders. Now those orders had vanished, leaving only fear behind. Rumors traveled faster than food. "The Americans are taking auxiliaries," someone whispered. "They say women too. They won't spare us. We'll be punished, all of us." No one knew the truth. No one felt safe. When the soldiers finally arrived and ordered them to march, Anna felt her legs move on instinct. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't dare. The war had stolen the habit of asking questions. They reached a convoy of trucks waiting beyond the ruins. Wooden boxcars stained by weather and war stood in long lines like patient beasts. When the guards opened the doors, the dark interiors seemed to swallow the daylight. The women hesitated. A few crossed themselves. Some gripped their suitcases until their knuckles whitened. Anna stepped inside and took a place against the wall. The door slid shut with a metallic finality that echoed in her bones. The sound reminded her of the moment a drawer closes over something precious. Except now it was closing over human lives. The convoy began to move. The wheels scraped. The walls shuddered. The women held on to one another for balance. Through the cracks of the wooden boards, Glimpses of Germany passed by in a blur. Burnt rooftops, collapsed bridges, scorched earth. Children stood barefoot on hills of rubble, watching the train with hollow eyes. Old men lifted their hands in weary gestures of surrender. Church towers cut into the gray sky like broken spears. Inside the boxcar, the air grew heavy. Someone whispered, "Where are they taking us?" Another answered, "Away." A third voice, trembling, said, "God help us." Anna looked down at her boots and tightened her jaw. She had prepared herself for hunger, for pain, for humiliation. That was what she expected from the enemy she'd been taught to fear. Nothing about this journey felt survivable. During the first years of the war, German newspapers, radio broadcasts, and whispered rumors painted America as a brutal wasteland. According to these stories, American cities were filled with lawlessness and poverty. Their soldiers were described as violent and merciless. Their culture was said to be shallow and corrupt. Many believed it. Many needed to believe it. Propaganda was easier to cling to than doubt. Anna remembered the posters she had seen on the walls of her old office. A smiling German family beneath a sturdy roof, contrasted with shadowy figures representing Allied nations. She remembered a Luftwaffe officer warning his staff that surrendering to Americans meant a fate worse than death. Now inside the boxcar rattling toward the west, the words returned with renewed force. If the Americans were as monstrous as she had been told, then every hour that passed brought her closer to the hands of those who hated her. The thought dug into her chest, sharp and relentless. She touched the pocket where her mother's last letter should have been. The letter was gone, lost somewhere in the retreat. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "Please let her be alive." The train didn't answer. It simply kept moving. When the boxcar doors opened again, the air smelled of salt. The women blinked in the daylight. Before them stretched a port choked with debris, beaches littered with broken concrete, cranes frozen mid-collapse, ships anchored under foreign flags. American soldiers stood along the pier. Some watched quietly. Others simply performed their duties with practiced movements, counting, recording, directing. The women had been bracing for cruelty. Instead, they were met with procedures. A guard handed Anna a tag with a number. Another guard pointed her toward a line. Another collected her suitcase, inspected it, then returned it without comment. The indifference unsettled her more than anger would have. Hatred was something she understood. Paperwork was surreal. Hours later, they were led up the gangway of a transport ship. Chains clanked softly under their boots. The engines thrummed below deck. The sea beyond looked endless, the color of metal under fog. As the coastline of Europe receded, a cold dread settled over the women. Their homeland, broken as it was, still held everything familiar: language, memories, the graves of family. The ocean ahead held nothing of that. They were sailing into the stories they had feared all their lives. Seasickness hit quickly. The bunks were arranged in crowded tiers, metal frames stacked 3 high. Diesel fumes clung to the air. The constant sway made it impossible to forget where they were. Food came on metal trays, bread, slices of meat, coffee so strong it stung the tongue. Many women froze when they saw the portions. They hadn't seen real bread in months. Some stared at the food as though it were a trick. Others held the trays with shaking hands. One woman murmured, "We'll pay for this later." Another whispered, "Eat now. You don't know when it ends." Anna lifted a piece of bread and felt a wave of emotion rise in her throat. It smelled warm, almost sweet. When she bit into it, the softness nearly broke her. She turned away, hiding her tears behind a curtain of unwashed hair. She had expected hunger. She had expected violence. She had prepared herself for cruelty. She had not prepared for kindness. The unexpectedness of it struck deeper than fear. For the first time since the journey began, Anna questioned the story she had been told. Not because she trusted the Americans, but because the world she was seeing didn't match the world she had been warned about. Somewhere between the gray ocean and the steel walls of the ship, her certainty began to fracture. Days passed. The sea rolled on. Then one morning, a murmur swept through the deck. "Land! Do you see it? Is that real?" Anna pushed through the crowd and saw it, a sweeping line on the horizon, rising out of mist and morning light. It grew taller with every passing minute. Angular shapes, straight edges, geometric towers. America. The skyline appeared untouched, almost serene. Smoke rose from chimneys, not from bombs. Bridges stretched across calm water. The Statue of Liberty stood still and resolute, its copper surface glowing in the early sun. To Anna, the sight was overwhelming. The contrast was too stark. Her mind reeled. Back home, cities had collapsed into piles of stone. Here, everything stood. A strange thought slipped through her defenses. This land has never known what we lived through. The ship docked at a busy pier filled with soldiers, workers, and civilians. Some stared with open curiosity. Others looked away. A few shouted insults. But no one approached the women with fists or threats. Instead, the guards lined them up and ushered them through processing stations with steady, detached efficiency. Their boots clicked on the wooden planks. Each step deeper into America pulled them further from the world they knew. Buses waited outside the docks, large olive-colored vehicles with canvas windows rolled halfway up. The women were guided inside, escorted by soldiers whose expressions were unreadable. As the buses left the harbor, the streets of America unfolded before them. Children on bicycles, men reading newspapers on porches, women carrying bags of groceries, dogs barking from fenced yards, rows of houses painted in bright colors untouched by ash. The world outside the window looked impossibly intact, almost staged. It felt like watching life through glass, life that belonged to someone else. A woman behind Anna whispered, "How can this exist at the same time as our world?" No one answered. The bus continued down smooth roads, past fields so green they seemed unreal. After years of rationing and smoke, the landscape felt like an insult and a miracle at the same time. The women sat stiffly, afraid to relax, afraid to hope, afraid to let the strange sense of safety inside their chests. For Anna, confusion pressed heavier than fear. She didn't know what the Americans wanted from them, and that uncertainty was its own kind of torture. The camp appeared suddenly. Rows of wooden barracks, tall watchtowers, fences edged with barbed wire. The gates, however, were not like the gates she had imagined. No skulls and no slogans, no signs of hatred, just order. The guards instructed them to step off the buses and form lines. They were counted again, examined, directed toward one last building before they could settle. The delousing station. The women's hearts pounded. For many, this was the moment they believed their humiliation would begin. Inside the tiled room, steam rose from metal pipes. A guard handed Anna a bar of soap, white, heavy, faintly floral. A moment of pure disbelief passed through her. Soap. Real soap. Then warm water poured from the nozzles, hot enough to loosen the dirt under their nails, hot enough to sting their shoulders, hot enough to make some women cry out in shock. Anna closed her eyes as the water ran over her face. It carried away grime, blood, sweat, and months of ash from the ruins of Germany. It washed down the drain, leaving her skin raw and clean. At that moment, something broke inside her, not in pain but in confusion so deep it unsettled her core. Why would the enemy treat them like this? Why give them warmth when cold would have been easier? Why offer them dignity when destruction seemed more fitting? She stepped out of the shower trembling. The hardest part was realizing she felt human again. That night, after being issued clean garments and blankets smelling faintly of starch, the women lay in bunks arranged neatly across the barrack. Outside, crickets hummed in the dark. No bombs, no sirens, no distant thunder of artillery. The silence pressed against their ears. Anna lay awake, staring into the dim ceiling. The softness of the blanket felt foreign. The mattress, though thin, felt too comfortable. The air smelled like wood and grass instead of smoke. She whispered into the darkness, "Why are we safe here?" No one answered, but in the quiet, she sensed that every woman in the room was asking the same question. For the first time since the war began, sleep came to her without fear. Yet even as she drifted into it, she knew something fundamental inside her had begun to shift. Safety after so much ruin felt dangerous. The next days would reveal truths more complex than any rumor they carried from Germany. The camp would show them routines that felt strange in their consistency. Food would be served in portions they didn't understand. Medical care would be offered without hatred. Work assignments would give structure to days that once held only chaos. Every kindness would deepen their confusion. Every meal would remind them of their starving families. Every quiet night would force them to confront memories they'd tried to bury. And slowly, reluctantly, painfully, each woman would discover that captivity was not the punishment she expected. It was something far more difficult. It was the beginning of a reckoning, a confrontation with what they believed, what they feared, what they lost, and what the world looked like beyond the walls of a collapsing Reich. Anna did not know it yet. None of them did. But the hardest battle ahead would not be fought with soldiers or weapons. It would be fought inside themselves. The first dawn inside the American camp arrived quietly, without sirens or distant shelling. A pale stripe of light crept across the barrack floors, illuminating rows of women who slept with expressions caught between exhaustion and disbelief. Outside, guards switched shifts in calm silence, boots on gravel, a cough in the cold morning air, the squeak of a barrack door. Anna opened her eyes to a world that felt unreal. The blanket wrapped around her was thin but clean. Her body, scrubbed raw from the shower the night before, felt strangely lighter. The scent of her own skin, soap instead of sweat, was almost disorienting. For months she had slept in bomb shelters, on cold floors, in railway stations where danger was a companion. Now she lay in a wooden bunk listening to the rhythmic chorus of crickets and the distant hum of America waking up. She sat slowly as if any sudden movement might break the quiet. A woman across from her whispered, "Do you think they're pretending before punishment begins?" Anna didn't answer, because she didn't know, because the softness of the morning frightened her more than darkness ever had. A bell rang somewhere near the gate, not an alarm, more like a school bell calling students to class. The day was beginning. A day in captivity, yes, but a day without fear of bombs. And that alone felt like betrayal. The women assembled in long lines outside the barracks. Some stood rigid, unwilling to abandon the posture drilled into them during the war. Others looked around nervously, eyes tracing the fences, the towers, the rifles. But the scene held an odd balance. Guards stood relaxed, rifles slung casually across their shoulders, not pointed at the prisoners, merely present. They watched, but not with hostility. Their movements were practiced, almost bored. Camp life was routine to them, not an arena for cruelty. As the sun rose, golden light washed over the camp. It felt wrong. It felt too gentle. The women were instructed to walk toward a long building where smoke rose from chimneys. The smell hit them before they understood what it was. Bread. Real bread. The kind that hadn't existed in Germany for years. The smell alone made some women quicken their pace involuntarily. Inside the mess hall, the warmth of stoves pushed back the morning chill. Rows of tables filled the room. A serving line stretched across the far wall, where American cooks in white aprons ladled food onto metal trays. Anna stopped in the doorway, frozen. She had prepared herself for rotting leftovers, sawdust bread, watery gruel, enough to keep prisoners alive but nothing more. What she saw instead looked like abundance. Stew thick with beef and vegetables. Bread brushed with melted butter. Coffee strong enough to sting the eyes. Behind her, someone whispered, "This is a trick." Someone else murmured, "I don't care. I'm hungry." When Anna reached the counter, a cook dropped a generous spoonful of stew onto her tray. The steam curled upward in rich waves. He slid a slice of bread beside it, then filled her mug with dark, fragrant coffee. He didn't sneer. He didn't spit into the food. He didn't look at her as if she were dirt. He simply said, "Next," and moved down the line. Anna sat at a long table among the other women. For a moment, no one touched their food. They stared at it like survivors of a shipwreck staring at land, disbelieving, hopeful, terrified. She lifted her spoon. The first taste nearly stopped her heart. Grease, salt, meat. Real meat, not scraps. Tears blurred her vision, and she turned away so no one would see. The warmth spread through her emptiness with a kind of violence, as if her body didn't know how to handle comfort. Around her, quiet sobs echoed. One woman whispered, "My family hasn't eaten this well in years." Another murmured, "Why are they feeding us like this?" Someone further down the table said, "It's to make us weak. Kindness will break us more than hunger." Anna tasted another spoonful, and another. Every bite felt like treason. The guards walked between the tables, checking attendance and watching for trouble. But their eyes held no hatred, only routine. One guard, a young soldier with sandy hair, paused briefly near Anna's table. His gaze moved over the prisoners without malice. When one woman spilled her coffee in nervous haste, he helped her wipe it up, muttering in awkward German, "No problem. Is okay." She stared at him as if he had spoken a prophecy. When he walked away, Anna whispered to the woman beside her, "They don't look like wolves." The woman answered, "That's how they get close." But even her voice lacked conviction. The days settled quickly into a pattern, simple, predictable, strangely humane. Morning bell, breakfast line, roll call, work assignments, lunch, more work, dinner, lights out. It felt like a small town trapped inside barbed wire. Anna found herself assigned to the laundry building, a long wooden structure humming with activity. Hot water boiled in steel drums. Soap floated on the surface in white flakes. American uniforms were stacked in tall, neat piles. There she scrubbed collars and sleeves until her fingers wrinkled. She pressed out wrinkles, hung garments to dry, folded them with mechanical precision. The work was tiring but mindless. No bombs, no screaming officers, no collapsing floors. Just soap and fabric and the warmth of steam. For the first time since the war began, she felt safe while working. And safety, she realized, was not a feeling she trusted. At the end of each day, prisoners received a small allotment of camp script, a printed, colorful paper currency valid only inside the camp. With it, they could buy items at the canteen. The first time Anna entered, she nearly stopped breathing. Shelves were filled with goods she had not seen since childhood. Chocolate bars, cigarettes, toothpaste, combs, stationery, gum, jam, lipstick. The sight of it hit her harder than chocolate. A color, a reminder of normal life, of being a woman, not a cog in a dying war machine. A girl from Bremen picked up a tube, turning it in trembling fingers. The moment the red pigment touched her lips, she laughed. A small, fragile sound that carried the weight of years. Anna stood frozen, unable to move. Her mother had once sworn by a similar shade before bombs destroyed their home. The memory cut deep. She bought a chocolate bar instead. When she took the first bite, sweetness flooded her mouth so intensely she almost cried again. The camp allowed letters, though they arrived slowly and often censored. Anna waited weeks before her first one came. The envelope looked thin. The handwriting inside was thinner. Her mother wrote from the ruins of Munich, "We boil weeds for soup. The roof is gone. If you are alive, write. If you can send hope, send it." Anna clutched the paper until it creased. Her stomach twisted with guilt. How could she eat stew while her family starved? How could she sleep safely while they hid in cellars? How could she laugh? Yes, she had laughed once, while they coughed from dust and cold. That night, she pushed away her dinner, staring at the tray until a guard told her quietly, "You need to eat." She turned her face from him, unable to speak. To be cared for by the enemy was a deeper wound than hate. Not all prisoners accepted the American strange civility. Some hoarded bread under their pillows. Some refused medicine, fearing poison. Some whispered at night that the kindness was a facade, that torture would come later. "Wait," they said, "they're softening us." Punishment always comes after hope, but hope continued to arrive in small, everyday forms. A guard carrying water on a hot afternoon, a nurse handing out aspirin, a cook offering extra potatoes to the thinnest woman in the line, an American officer saying please instead of barking orders. Each moment was gentle. Each moment was foreign. To women taught to see Americans as beasts, this humanity was unbearable. Weeks passed. The war ended officially, but the camp continued. One morning, a list appeared of women assigned to work outside the wire, fields, canneries, municipal parks in nearby towns. When Anna saw her name, her heart clenched. Leaving the camp felt dangerous. Leaving the camp meant confronting the full world of the enemy. The truck carried them into a small American town lined with shops and clean sidewalks. Children pointed. Women stared. Men looked with curiosity, not hatred. At a bakery, the smell of fresh bread drifted through an open window. A group of schoolgirls skipped past, laughing. Posters advertised movies playing at the local cinema. It was surreal. Germany lay in ruins. Here, life continued untouched. A woman beside Anna whispered, "We were told they were starving." Another replied, "We were told many things." The words fell heavy into the air. During a lunch break inside a church hall, volunteers served sandwiches and slices of apple. Real fruit, whole fruit. Anna bit into an apple and nearly wept. She hadn't tasted one since 1942. The sweetness felt like an accusation. That night, the barracks buzzed with overwhelmed whispers. Some women spoke with awe, others with bitterness. It's paradise. No, it's a trick. They want us to forget who we are. They want us to see them as good. They want something. But Anna lay awake, staring at the roof beams. She had seen a bakery with full shelves, children with round faces, a town untouched by the hunger-devouring Europe. She had seen America, and it didn't look like what she had been told. The fracture inside her widened, a silent crack that reached the deepest parts of her worldview. The turning point didn't come through a grand event. It arrived quietly, almost invisibly, during an ordinary workday. A guard dropped his flashlight during roll call. Instinctively, Anna bent, picked it up and handed it to him. Their fingers touched for half a second. He nodded, just a simple gesture. Not warm, not cold, just human. But in that moment, Anna felt something shatter. Hatred had been easy. Hatred had been safe. Hatred required nothing. Recognition, real recognition, was terrifying. She stepped back quickly, heart pounding, unsure if she had committed a crime. The guard didn't seem to notice the magnitude of the moment, but she did, because for the first time since the war began, she had looked into the eyes of the enemy and not found a monster. She had found someone. As summer shifted into autumn, the camp changed with it. The trees around the fences burned red and gold. The air grew sharper, the nights colder. Inside the barracks, the women collected blankets, huddling together as frost crept along the window edges. But something else shifted too. Their bodies grew stronger, skin clearing, cheeks filling out, muscles returning. A mirror showed them not starving soldiers, but women restored to health. And that restoration carried its own ache. The enemy had fed them back to life. The Reich had starved them. The contradiction gnawed at them with relentless precision. By now, the hardest battles were no longer outside the wire. They were inside, between propaganda and reality, between loyalty and awakening, between guilt and gratitude, between who they had been and who they were becoming. Anna wrote in her diary, "To be cared for by those I once feared is a war I do not know how to fight." The turning point was complete. America had defeated them not through cruelty, but through kindness. A kindness that forced them to question everything they had believed. And questioning was a punishment more profound than hunger. By late autumn, the American POW camp no longer felt foreign. Its routines had settled into the bones of daily life. Work assignments came with predictable rhythm. Meals arrived at the same hour. Guards walked their rounds with the same tired steps. There was no violence, no chaos, no punishments beyond occasional reprimands. But beneath this calm surface, another war had begun. A war inside the women themselves. One that struck far deeper than any battlefield. For Anna, it started with something small, the absence of fear. She woke without expecting explosions. She worked without expecting beatings. She slept without expecting death. And the absence of fear felt like betrayal. Fear had been a companion for so long that living without it left a hollow space inside her chest. Into that space crept questions, dangerous ones, about home, about truth, about the very shape of the world. Her waking hours were filled with work. Her hands scrubbed uniforms until her skin ached. But her mind wandered into places she didn't want it to go. What if everything she had believed had been wrong? What if the enemy was not the monster she had been told he was? What if her suffering came not from those outside Germany, but from those inside it. Every day these questions burrowed deeper. Every day they hurt more. It was a strange paradox. The better the Americans treated them, the more unbearable captivity became. Clean blankets, warm meals, predictable routines, medical care, wages, canteen goods, human decency, all of it pressed against the women like a weight. Kindness was heavy. Kindness demanded response. Kindness forced reflection. Cruelty would have been simpler. Cruelty would have reinforced everything they had been taught by Nazi officers and propaganda posters. Cruelty would have validated their fears and justified their hatred. Instead, America gave them civility, and civility was a mirror they did not want to look into. Each woman felt it in her own way. Some cried in secret, some grew angry, some withdrew into silence. Some clung harder to ideology, terrified of losing themselves. Inside the barracks at night, the air hummed with unspoken conflict. The enemy had offered them humanity. Their own nation had offered them ruin. And the comparison was a kind of torment. Letters from Germany became the sharpest source of pain. Anna received one written on paper so thin it felt like breath. Her mother described Munich in ruin, walls gone, windows shattered, children living in cellars, neighbors disappearing without explanation, food lines stretching for hours, hunger turning strong men into shadows. The letter ended with, "We pray you are alive. If you can send hope, send it. If you can send anything, send it." Anna folded the letter slowly, as if it might break. That night she couldn't touch her dinner. Stew, bread, even the smell of it made her stomach twist with guilt. Her family starved. She ate. Her home lay in ashes. She slept safely. Her city froze in winter darkness. She wrapped herself in a warm blanket. Nothing felt right. Across the barracks, other women read similar letters. Some wept. Some stared blankly at the wall. Some tore the pages into pieces because reading them hurt too much. A quiet grief settled over the room, so heavy it seemed to thicken the air. And in that grief, bitterness began to grow, not toward the Americans, but toward the Germany that had abandoned them. A small group of women, led by the outspoken Ingrid Weber, rebelled against the softening they saw in their comrades. Ingrid refused to eat full meals, refused to speak English, refused to acknowledge any comfort. "The Americans want to break us," she whispered harshly in the barracks at night. "Not through violence, through kindness." Many listened. Many wanted to believe her. It was easier than confronting their own confusion. But Anna watched Ingrid closely. She recognized something beneath the surface. Ingrid wasn't strong. She was terrified. Terrified that if she admitted the Americans were human, she would have to confront the lies she had lived by. Terrified that her loyalty had been manipulated. Terrified that she would lose the identity she clung to like armor. Her resistance was not defiance. It was desperation. A shield against truth. The guards, too, were changing. At first, they had seen the women only as prisoners, enemy auxiliaries to be managed. But as weeks became months, the sharp edges of hostility faded. Many guards were young men barely older than the women they watched. Some had never been to Europe. Some had never seen German civilians before. They had only known battlefield rumors and propaganda leaflets. But the prisoners they saw each day were not monsters. They were thin, exhausted women with trembling hands and hollow eyes. Women who jumped at sudden noises. Women who worked hard and rarely complained. Women who looked frighteningly similar to their sisters back home. One guard wrote a letter to his mother. "They're not what we were told. They're just girls, scared girls. Another guard once dropped a carton of milk, and a German prisoner helped him clean it up without hesitation. He later told his friend, "For a second, she wasn't the enemy. She was just someone." Small moments like these accumulated, one after another, blurring the strict lines of wartime hatred. And blurring lines was dangerous. As relations softened, the camp administration proposed a small cultural exchange event. The German women would demonstrate traditional crafts, embroidery, wood carving, bread making, to a group of local American families. The goal was simple: humanize the prisoners, ease community fears, and foster small bridges of understanding. The idea terrified the women, not because they feared violence, but because they feared connection. Anna spent evenings carving small wooden ornaments she remembered from childhood. Each curl of wood felt like peeling away a piece of emotional armor she did not know how to live without. Some women practiced English phrases, some rehearsed songs, some prepared drawings of their hometowns before the bombs. There was nervous excitement, a strange, fragile hope, but the moment that hope appeared, it was crushed. News of the planned event leaked into the nearby town. The reaction was immediate and brutal. Fraternizing with Nazis. Have they forgotten our boys are fighting overseas? Compassion for the enemy is betrayal. Why should prisoners be treated like guests? Justice demands punishment, not picnics. Newspapers published angry letters. Church groups condemned the idea. Families who had lost sons in Europe demanded the event be canceled. Men confronted camp officers in the town square. Women whispered behind closed doors. Shops refused service to guards from the camp. The backlash burned through the community like wildfire. In the end, the camp commandant had no choice. He canceled the cultural exchange immediately. When the announcement reached the women's barracks, it landed like a blow. The fragility of hope had been exposed, and the wound it left was deep. That night, the barracks were filled with conflicting emotions. Some women felt relief that they would not have to face the families of American soldiers. Relief that their carefully built emotional walls remained intact. Others felt humiliation that the community saw them as monsters, as symbols of everything that had been lost, as reminders of sons who never came home. But for most, the cancellation triggered something darker. Shame. Shame because part of them had wanted the event, wanted connection, wanted forgiveness, wanted to be seen as human again. When that possibility vanished, it left a hollowness sharper than hunger. Anna lay awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling beams. Her wooden ornaments lay unfinished beneath her mattress. Not because she lacked time, but because she no longer knew what purpose they served. In the weeks that followed, the emotional tension tightened like a noose. The guards, now under community scrutiny, grew distant again. Their eyes hardened. Their voices became less friendly. Small acts of warmth disappeared. The women retreated into themselves. Laughter vanished. Conversations grew shorter. English lessons emptied. Even the canteen felt different, less like a small refuge, more like a reminder of what they could never truly have. The softened world that had begun forming between Americans and Germans cracked apart. Anna felt the shift most painfully at work. She had grown used to the gentle nods from guards, to the occasional shared glance, to the quiet understanding that both sides were navigating an impossible situation. But now those nods disappeared. Guards avoided eye contact. The air felt colder. And inside her chest, something fragile began to not break, but bend, dangerously. The turning point inside the camp, the true turning point, began with two women on opposite sides of the war. Greta Muller, a German prisoner who worked in the hospital, and Dorothy Hayes, an American Gold Star mother whose only son had died in Normandy. Their connection, at first accidental and unwanted, would set in motion a quiet transformation neither woman expected. Dorothy delivered bread to the camp each week, part of a small contract supporting her struggling cafe. She avoided looking closely at the prisoners, but one morning she saw Greta tending gently to a sick child. A German toddler who wailed from fever, a child who had known nothing but fear. Dorothy froze. The image struck her with painful clarity. Greta's tenderness reminded her of Jimmy. Her son, her pride, her boy buried under the soil of Europe. She fled the scene, shaken to her core. But the image would not leave her. Not that night, not the next, not ever. Meanwhile, Greta found something that became her secret treasure, an American penny lying in the dust near the fence. She picked it up with trembling fingers. Real copper, solid, not the fragile iron coins Germany used now. A symbol of a land that still had abundance, a symbol of a world untouched by hunger, a symbol of everything that contradicted her indoctrination. She slipped it into her pocket. At night, she held it in her palm and whispered to herself, "If this is the enemy, then what world have I lived in?" One day, Greta received devastating news. The July 20th plot to kill Hitler had failed. The Gestapo had begun mass arrests. Anyone even remotely connected to dissent was being hunted. Her family was in danger. She broke down in the hospital supply closet, shaking, sobbing, unable to breathe. Captain Walsh, the American nurse who oversaw her work, found her. For a moment, they simply looked at one another, enemy and captor, united only by fear for their loved ones. Then Walsh did something simple. She placed a hand on Greta's shoulder. No words, no politics, just shared human sorrow. In that gesture, something inside Greta cracked open, and Anna, watching all of this from a quiet distance, felt that crack inside herself too. If the enemy shared her grief, if the enemy felt fear, if the enemy cared, then what did that make them? The true emotional breaking point arrived with a single act of courage. Dorothy Hayes requested permission to visit the camp, not as a bread supplier, but to see the German nurse, though she did not yet know Greta's name. She carried with her a worn German-English dictionary, Jimmy's dictionary, the one he had bought before deployment, the one he used to speak to wounded German prisoners, the one that symbolized who he had been, a soldier who believed in humanity as fiercely as he fought for his country. Dorothy walked through the gate with her spine stiff, her breath tight, her grief heavy. She expected hatred, anger, resentment. Instead, she found Greta waiting, hands trembling. Their first words to each other came awkwardly, clumsily, painfully. "Your son," Greta asked softly. Dorothy nodded. "Jimmy." Then word by word a conversation unfolded. About war, about sons, about brothers, about loss. Greta spoke of her brother Carl, who had died in Russia from illness, not bullets. Dorothy spoke of Jimmy's letters. Letters filled with hope. Letters that admitted fear. Letters that described treating wounded German prisoners with kindness. Greta's eyes ached with tears. "Your son," she whispered, searching slowly for the English words. "He saw person, not enemy." Dorothy cried openly then, for the first time in months. Two women, one German, one American, grieved together in a small room that smelled of cold cement and disinfectant. And something inside the camp shifted. Nothing outwardly changed. The guards still walked their rounds. The women still ate their rations. Daily routines remained the same, but emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, everything changed. The walls of hatred, carefully built brick by years of propaganda, began to dissolve. Not through speeches, not through ideology, not through force, through small moments of shared humanity. Anna watched it all happen, like someone witnessing a new world form out of the ashes of the old. And she felt something inside her she had not felt since childhood. Something dangerous, something healing, something terrifying. Hope. It took months for Anna to understand the new truth. The hell within was not the camp. It was the conflict inside her heart, between loyalty and doubt, between anger and gratitude, between guilt and survival, between the world she came from and the world she now saw with her own eyes. To accept kindness from the enemy was to admit that her own nation had lied. To accept safety was to admit her own people had failed to protect her. To accept humanity was to admit she had been taught to dehumanize others. Every meal, every shower, every respectful gesture from an American guard deepened that internal war. That was the true hell, the kind that left no scars on the skin, only on the soul. And as winter crept toward the camp, the women began to realize they had survived the bombs. They had survived surrender. They had survived captivity. But surviving the truth would be the hardest battle of all. Winter arrived quietly, creeping through the cracks of the barracks, settling onto the wooden floors like a thin film of ice. Each morning, frost clung to the barbed wire fences, turning them into shimmering sculptures beneath the pale sun. The camp felt still. Still in a way that was beautiful. Still in a way that was terrifying. For Anna, mornings had grown deceptively gentle. She would wake to the soft crunch of footsteps outside, the bell signaling roll call, the smell of hot porridge drifting from the mess hall. These sensations had become familiar, comforting even, and familiarity had become its own source of dread. Because nothing familiar in captivity could last forever. The war had ended months ago. Europe lay in ruins, and Germany, the homeland she carried inside her chest, had fractured into hunger, rubble, and grief. Rumors had begun to circulate. Transfers were coming. Repatriation lists were being prepared. Some women would be sent home soon. Home. The word no longer carried its old meaning. The announcement came on a morning so cold that Anna's breath rose in clouds before her face. The women assembled in formation, boots crunching on frozen earth. A senior American officer stood before them, a clipboard tucked beneath his arm. He cleared his throat. A transport will depart in the coming weeks. Names will be posted. Prepare your belongings. Further instructions will follow. He turned to leave. No one moved. No one breathed. Then the whispers erupted. They're sending us back. To what? To ruins. To starvation. To family. Or what's left of it. Anna felt the words hit her like blows. A strange ache filled her chest. Part hope, part dread, part guilt so deep it felt like a physical wound. Returning home meant seeing her mother again. It also meant seeing what remained of Munich, and facing the question she feared most. Would she survive the truth of home? After surviving the contradictions of captivity? In the days that followed, the camp shifted into a strange tension. Women packed and repacked their few belongings. Some clutched at small treasures from the canteen, a bar of soap, a comb, a half-used tube of lipstick. Others folded American-issued clothing with careful hands, wondering if they would be allowed to take it. Anna kept only 3 items: her diary, a wooden ornament carved during the cultural exchange preparations, and a small paper bag with a chocolate bar she planned to give her mother. Each object felt like a piece of the impossible world she had lived in behind the fence. Work continued, but conversations grew heavy. "I'm afraid," whispered a girl from Cologne, "of going home, of surviving here." A few women admitted in quiet, trembling voices, "I don't want to leave." Every time Anna heard it, her throat tightened, because she understood, because she felt the same. Captivity had saved her life, not only her body, her mind. It had shown her a world outside the Reich's lies, a world where people were not symbols or enemies, just people. Leaving would cost something, something she didn't have a name for. The final days unfolded with an almost painful normality, each moment sharper because it might be the last. Breakfast in the mess hall, steaming porridge, slices of warm bread, the familiar banter between cooks and guards, the soft murmurs of women savoring each bite while thinking of their starving families. Work in the laundry, soap-scented steam rising from basins, uniforms stacked neatly, hands chapped and reddened by hot water. Evening roll call, rows of women, their breaths rising in unison, forming brief clouds that vanished into the cold. Every sound seemed magnified: the thump of boots, the rattle of tin trays, the hum of the watchtower searchlight turning slowly in the night. Everything that once tormented them with its strangeness now felt unbearably precious. In captivity, they had found a fragile sense of order. Outside the fence lay a world without order at all. 2 days before the lists were posted, Dorothy Hayes returned to the camp. She carried a small parcel in her hands, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Frost glittered on her coat sleeves as she walked. When Greta saw her in the visiting room, her heart squeezed with emotion that frightened her. Dorothy placed the parcel on the table. "It's nothing much," she said quietly. "Just some things for your family." Inside the parcel were small gifts, items Dorothy had chosen with care: soap, a few ration sweets, a scarf she had knitted herself, a small photograph of Jimmy placed gently beneath the scarf. "For your mother," Dorothy whispered. Greta had no words, only tears. Dorothy reached across the table, resting her hand on Greta's for a moment. "War takes everything," she said softly, "but it doesn't have to take who we are." It was a simple sentence, but to Greta and to Anna, who watched from a quiet corner, it felt like an anchor thrown into stormy water, a way to stand, a way to breathe, a way to return home with something intact. As the transport date approached, the women faced a new discomfort: mirrors. Their faces had changed, cheeks no longer hollow, skin clearer, eyes brighter, bodies stronger. Captivity had not broken them, it had rebuilt them, and that realization hurt, more than hunger, more than fear, more than shame. To return home healthy while their families starved felt like a betrayal so deep it left bruises on the soul. Anna looked at her reflection in the polished steel of a washing drum and whispered, "My mother won't recognize me." But it wasn't recognition she feared. It was the question in her mother's eyes. Why were you saved when so many were not? The night before the final repatriation names were posted, the barracks were silent. No whispered conversations, no nervous laughter, no arguments, only breathing. Anna lay awake, staring at the faint glow of the guard tower lights through the window. Her heart felt too large for her chest. Her mind raced through memories of Germany, of the ship, of soap, of stew, of the penny Greta kept hidden under her pillow, of moments she wished she had never seen, moments that had rewritten her understanding of the world. She pressed her diary to her chest. "If I leave," she whispered, "please let me carry this new truth with me. And if I return to ruins, let these pages be a reminder that somewhere kindness still exists." She didn't know to whom she spoke, but the prayer felt necessary. Morning came with a cutting wind. The women gathered outside the main administrative building. The list was posted with the soft thunk of a tack pressed into wood. A few papers fluttered under the icy breeze. A guard stepped aside. Silence. Then the women surged forward, not with chaos, but with trembling restraint. Anna waited until the crowd parted enough for her to approach. Her eyes scanned the names, line by line, surname by surname, hands shaking, and then Anna Keller. Her breath caught. It felt unreal, like seeing her own death certificate, except this one sent her home. Beside her, other women broke down, some with relief, some with terror, some with grief for friends whose names were not on the list. The officer's voice cut through the air. "Pack your belongings. You depart at dawn." The final day passed like a dream. Women washed their faces slowly, as if memorizing the feel of warm water. They folded their blankets carefully, fingers lingering on the fabric. They walked the length of the barracks, touching the wooden beams, the metal bunks, the windows where frost always gathered first. Everywhere, small groups gathered for quiet goodbyes. "If your family's alive, write to me. If you reach Hamburg, ask for my aunt. If you see Munich, pray for those who remained. I hope your mother waits for you." Anna hugged Greta tightly. "When you return," she whispered, "remember what you saw here." Greta nodded through tears. "So will you." At dawn, the buses rumbled to life, engines grumbling in the cold, exhaust rising in white plumes. The women stepped forward one by one, boots crunching on frost-covered earth. Guards checked their tags, their belongings, their faces. Some guards gave stiff nods. Some looked away. A few whispered quiet wishes of safety. Anna climbed the bus steps and paused. Through the window, she saw the camp, the guard towers, the barracks, the laundry building, the fences glistening like silver threads in the morning light. She realized with a jolt that she would miss it. Miss captivity, miss the stability, miss the strange, unwanted safety, miss the very place that had forced her to face her own beliefs. As the bus lurched forward, Anna pressed her forehead to the cold glass. The camp shrank behind her. A place of contradictions, a place of unexpected humanity, a place where her old self had died, and another had begun to form. Hours passed. The landscape changed from familiar American fields to the industrial roads leading toward the harbor. Ships loomed in the distance, silent giants waiting to carry the women eastward. Anna watched as the shoreline approached. The return journey would be cold. The return journey would be harsh. The return journey would force her to face everything she had become. But she no longer felt like the frightened secretary who had boarded a train months earlier. Something inside her had solidified, not into defiance, but into clarity. She had seen the world outside propaganda. She had touched humanity in the hands of her enemy. She had survived a war within herself, and she would carry that with her, across the sea, across the ruins, across whatever waited in Munich. As the ship's engines roared to life, Anna opened her diary to the last page. She wrote, "I leave America with more questions than answers. The war outside has ended, but the war inside continues. I go home to ruins, but I carry proof that not all the world is ruin. If I must rebuild my life, let me rebuild it on truth, not on fear." She closed the diary and held it tightly. Behind her, the coastline of America slowly faded into the mist. Ahead of her stretched an uncertain future. But between those two worlds, between captivity and freedom, between past and future, between lies and truth, she had found something fragile and powerful and irrevocable. A new way of seeing, a new way of being, a new self born from contradiction. And as the ship turned east, carrying her toward a broken homeland, Anna understood. Survival was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning.